The snap echoed across the volcanic sand long before anyone understood what it meant. October morning, 1944, somewhere in the Leyte Gulf littoral, where the jungle met the ash-gray beach, and the air tasted of salt and cordite and burning diesel. An American rifleman, 19 years old, farm-taught, had just put 8 rounds downrange in less than 6 seconds, each one finding its mark at 300 yards, while a Japanese sniper, bolt-action Arasaka still cycling its second cartridge, realized with the clarity that precedes death that the war had changed velocities. The rifle in the American's hands weighed 9.5 pounds, fed itself, and required no conscious thought between trigger pulls. It was semi-automatic. It was prolific. And across 10,000 miles of Pacific theater, from Guadalcanal's malarial gloom to the frozen Aleutian rock, it had become the arithmetic that decided firefights before they finished. The Japanese called it Jihatsu-ju, the self-firing gun. They did not say it with admiration. They said it the way sailors name typhoons. MacArthur had called it something else. In a photograph that would circulate through stars and stripes and eventually lodge itself in the folklore of American arms, the general stood on a New Guinea airstrip, one hand resting on the walnut stock of an M1 Garand, and told a reporter it was the greatest battle implement ever devised. Hyperbole was the general's native tongue, but this time the claim carried ballistic truth. The rifle had been in service since 1936, adopted over howls of protest from ordnance boards who distrusted anything that fed itself, and by the time the Pacific War ground into its third year, it had rewritten the grammar of infantry combat. The Japanese had expected courage, tenacity, night attacks, and the spiritual weight of Bushido to offset American industrial might. They had not expected a weapon that could empty a clip before their own riflemen could work a bolt twice. War is often a conversation between doctrines, but the M1 turned it into a monologue. The side that could reload faster, suppress harder, and keep sustained fire without pausing to thumb cartridges into an internal magazine simply talked over the opposition until the opposition stopped talking. But this is not a story about a rifle, or rather, it is not only about a rifle. It is about what happens when an entire supply chain bends itself around a single piece of steel and walnut, when factories in Springfield and Winchester and International Harvester retool their floors to spit out gas-operated actions by the 100,000, when logistics officers realize they need to ship not just ammunition, but an entirely new calculus of consumption. Because a semi-automatic rifle in the hands of a competent infantryman will chew through bandoliers 3 times faster than the bolt actions it replaced. It is about a woman named Lieutenant Evelyn C. Sorba, Colson Boxcar, who ran the ammunition throughput desk at Finchhafen Depot, and who understood before most colonels that firepower was now a logistical problem before it was a tactical one. And it is about the strange, grudging evolution that occurs when your enemy begins to fear your equipment more than your strategy. When the sound of a Garand's ping, that distinctive ejection of an empty en-bloc clip, becomes a psychological bookmark in a firefight, a tiny sonic event that tells every Japanese soldier within earshot that somewhere, an American is reloading, and they have perhaps 2 seconds to move before the firing resumes. The island of Leyte, October 1944. A day +3. The beachhead is no longer contested, though sniper fire still peppers the dunes at irregular intervals and the jungle exhales its wet vegetable rot over everything. 6th Army has put 70,000 men ashore in 72 hours, and now the problem is not landing but feeding the men, feeding the trucks, feeding the howitzers, and above all feeding the rifles. Each infantry division carries roughly 14,000 M1 Garands. Each Garand in sustained combat will consume an average of 120 rounds per day per man, though some riflemen, the aggressive ones or the terrified ones, will burn through double that. The math is pitiless. 6th Army needs 16 million rounds per week just to keep the infantry in the fight, and that does not count the carbines, the bars, the machine guns, the mortars, or the howitzers that are already tearing divots out of the hillsides to the west. Supply dumps are appearing behind the beach like fungal blooms. Pyramids of ammunition crates stacked 8 feet high, stabilized with cargo nets, marked with white stencil codes that only the ordnance clerks understand. Forklifts sputter through the sand, their diesel engines coughing blue smoke. There is a smell here that will recur throughout this story, a smell that the men will remember decades later when someone mentions the Pacific. Hot metal, ocean brine, canvas damp with mildew, and underneath it all the faint sweetness of cosmoline, the rust-preventive grease that coats every weapon fresh from the factory. Lieutenant Evelyn C. Sorba stands in the shade of a tarp strung between 2 palm trees, a clipboard in one hand and a mug of overboiled coffee in the other. She is 26 years old, Hungarian-American, a Chicago schoolteacher in another life who joined the WAC because the pay was better than the Board of Education and because her brothers were already overseas. She has a face built for skepticism, sharp jaw, dark eyes that do not miss clerical errors, and a reputation for being the only logistics officer in the theater who can calculate tonnage per liberty ship in her head, while also explaining to a furious infantry captain why his battalion's ammo requisition is 3 days late. Her call sign, Boxcar, was not chosen by her. It was bestowed by a Signal Corps sergeant in New Guinea who watched her reorganize an entire depot's worth of misrouted cargo in a single night, moving crates with the methodical precision of a railyard switchman. The name stuck. Now, when a harried quartermaster radios in from some godforsaken strip of coral asking where his 556 pallets are, the reply comes back, "Check with Boxcar. She'll know." She knows because she has spent 18 months turning ammunition distribution into a science. Before Sorba, before the depots formalized their procedures, ammunition arrived in theater the way everything arrived, in chaos. Crates stacked according to whichever stevedore crew unloaded the ship first. No indexing. No manifests that matched reality. Requests routed through 3 different supply chains depending on whether the requesting unit was Army, Marine, or some hybrid Alamo Scouts outfit that answered to MacArthur's headquarters and no one else. Sorba changed that. She built a system, color-coded tags, rotating stock, priority lanes for frontline units, a requisition form that could not be ignored because it required a colonel's signature and a carbon copy that went straight to her desk. The infantry loved her. The rear echelon brass tolerated her because the numbers did not lie. Since Finchhafen Depot came online under her supervision, ammunition shortfalls had dropped by 60%. 6th Army could shoot faster because Boxcar could count faster. But counting is only half the story. The other half is the rifle itself, that 9.5-pound piece of American manufacturing ingenuity that John Garand, a Canadian-born engineer, had designed in a Springfield armory basement during the Depression. Gas-operated, semi-automatic, chambered in .3006 Springfield, fed by an 8-round en-bloc clip that slid into the receiver from the top and ejected with that signature ping when the last round fired. It was not the first semi-automatic rifle. Mexico's Mondragon predated it, as did various European experiments, but it was the first to be issued as standard equipment to an entire army's infantry. That decision, made in 1936 over the objections of ordnance conservatives who believed soldiers would waste ammunition if they could fire too fast, turned out to be the hinge on which the Pacific War swung. The Japanese Type 99 Arisaka, by contrast, was a bolt-action rifle descended from the Mauser lineage, robust, accurate, and catastrophically slow in a firefight. A trained Japanese rifleman could cycle his bolt and fire perhaps 15 aimed rounds per minute. An American with an M1 could fire 30 rounds per minute without breathing hard, and if adrenaline or fear took over, 45. The differential was not marginal. It was existential. Firefights in the Pacific were not the sweeping tank battles of Europe or the set-piece artillery duels of the Eastern Front. They were intimate, sudden, and decided in seconds. A squad stumbling onto an ambush, a platoon pinned in a ravine, A lone machine gun nest holding up an entire company until someone could flank it. In those moments, the side that could put more bullets downrange in the first 30 seconds usually won, because suppression, keeping the enemy's heads down, disrupting their aim, forcing them into cover, was more valuable than precision. The M1 excelled at suppression. It did not require the shooter to break cheek weld, to pull the bolt, to thumb another cartridge into place. It simply fired, ejected, chambered, fired again. The rifleman's job simplified to sight picture and trigger press, a loop that could be executed under pressure, in mud, in darkness, while taking fire. Japanese after-action reports, the ones that survived, speak to this. They describe American infantry as possessing inexhaustible firepower, as though each soldier carried a light machine gun. They were half right. Each soldier carried a rifle that approached the volume of fire of a light machine gun. And when you multiplied that across a platoon, across a company, the effect was a kind of acoustic violence that made coordinated counterattack almost impossible. There is a letter in the National Archives, written by a Japanese lieutenant named Tanaka, recovered from a dugout on Peleliu. It is dated September 1944, a month before Leyte. Tanaka writes to his brother, a staff officer in Tokyo, and the letter is careful, coded, aware that military mail is censored, but the despair leaks through anyway. He describes an engagement near the airfield where his platoon, 38 men, tried to assault an American position held by perhaps 20 Marines. "We advanced in the prescribed manner," Tanaka writes, "with covering fire from the ridge, but their rifles did not pause. There was no rhythm to their fire, no interval in which we could move. It was as though each man had a machine gun. We lost 16 men in the first minute. I ordered withdrawal. This is not cowardice. This is arithmetic." The letter ends there. Tanaka was killed 2 days later by an artillery barrage, and his correspondence was filed by some Navy translator in Hawaii and forgotten until a graduate student stumbled on it in 1987. But the phrase lingers. This is not cowardice. This is arithmetic. War had become a math problem, and the Americans had brought a better calculator. Back at Finchhafen, Lieutenant Sorba is wrestling with a different kind of arithmetic. The depot handles ammunition for 3 divisions, 2 independent regiments, and an assortment of reconnaissance and artillery units, whose supply needs change daily depending on which hillside MacArthur has decided to take next. The M1 Garand, as reliable as it is, has an appetite. Each rifle requires .3006 ammunition in 8-round clips, and those clips are loaded at the factory into bandoliers, each bandolier holding 6 clips, 48 rounds total. An infantry rifleman typically carries 10 clips on his person, 80 rounds, plus bandoliers in his pack. In a single day of heavy contact, he will go through all of it and request resupply by nightfall. Multiply that by 14,000 riflemen per division, and the numbers become theological. Sorba's requisition logs for October 1944 show that 6th Army is burning through approximately 2 million rounds of .3006 per day, not counting machine gun ammunition, which uses the same cartridge but is belt-fed and consumed in even more staggering quantities. 2 million rounds per day. That is 83,000 rounds per hour. 23 rounds per second, every second, around the clock, for as long as the fighting continues. The logistics of moving that much ammunition from the United States to the Philippines is a story in itself, one that involves Liberty ships, refrigerated holds repurposed as dry storage, longshoremen working triple shifts in San Francisco and Seattle, and a transport network that spans half the Earth's circumference. But Sorba's job begins where the ships end. At the dock, where cranes swing cargo nets full of crates onto flatbed trucks, and those trucks rumble through the mud to the depot, and the crates are broken down, inventoried and staged according to priority codes that she has written in grease pencil on a plywood chart nailed to a tent pole. She does not sleep much. There is coffee, a cot in the corner of the supply tent, and the hum of diesel generators that never quite shuts off. At night she writes letters home, not to her parents, Her father died in 1940. Her mother does not write back. But to a friend from Teachers College, a woman named Ruth who is teaching 5th grade in Cicero and who has no idea what a forklift is or why anyone would care. Dear Ruth, C. Sorba writes on October 10, 1944, I have become very good at counting things I will never personally use. Today, 47,000 rifle rounds, 9,000 mortar shells, 1,200 grenades, and one excellent cup of coffee that someone probably stole from an officer's mess. The men call me Boxcar. I think it's meant to be affectionate. The war is loud but organized. I hope the same is true in Cicero. The rifle's reputation did not emerge fully formed. In the early days of the war, particularly during the chaos of the Philippines in 1941 and the desperate holding actions on Bataan, the M1 was present but not yet dominant. Many units were still equipped with the M1903 Springfield, the bolt-action rifle that had served in World War I and that the Army had been reluctant to retire. Ammunition was scarce. Training was incomplete. The Japanese, flush with victory and momentum, did not yet fear American small arms because they had not yet faced them in sustained numbers. That changed in 1942 on Guadalcanal, where the Marines, who had adopted the M1 ahead of the Army, began to demonstrate what semi-automatic fire could do in jungle warfare. The environment was brutal: triple canopy rainforest, mud that swallowed boots, humidity that corroded metal overnight, and an enemy who specialized in night infiltration and close-quarters ambush. The M1 thrived. Its gas-operated action was more forgiving of dirt and moisture than the recoil-operated systems tried by other nations. Its weight, initially criticized as excessive, turned out to be an advantage. The rifle was steady, absorbed recoil well, and could be used as a club in hand-to-hand fighting without breaking. And its semi-automatic fire in the frantic, close-range engagements that characterized jungle combat was simply faster than anything the Japanese could answer with. There is a Marine gunnery sergeant, name lost to history, who supposedly told a war correspondent in early 1943, "Give me 8 Marines with Garans, and I'll take a position held by 20 Japs with Arasakas, not because we're braver, because we'll shoot them before they shoot us." The quote, apocryphal or not, circulated through the ranks and became a kind of unofficial doctrine. Firepower was now the first move in every tactical equation. The Japanese, doctrinally committed to night attacks and bayonet charges designed to exploit American fear and inexperience, found themselves running into a buzzsaw. An M1 Garand in the hands of a nervous 19-year-old private, firing as fast as he could pull the trigger into the darkness, would put more rounds downrange than a Japanese platoon armed with bolt actions could reciprocate. The night attacks did not stop. Japanese tactical culture was too rigid, too invested in the myth of offensive spirit, but they became costlier, bloodier, less effective. By mid-1943, captured Japanese documents began to reflect a shift. Orders to platoon leaders: avoid prolonged firefights with American infantry, use terrain, wait for artillery. The rifle had forced a doctrinal retreat. MacArthur understood this, or at least his staff did. The general was not a small-arms enthusiast. His interests ran toward grand strategy, amphibious landings, and the eventual recapture of Manila. But he grasped that infantry firepower was a force multiplier that allowed smaller units to hold larger frontages, which in turn allowed him to concentrate forces for breakthrough operations without leaving his flanks exposed. In his communiques to the War Department, MacArthur repeatedly emphasized the need for ammunition resupply, often in terms that sounded less like military requests and more like industrial demands. "We are not fighting a war of maneuver," he wrote in November 1943. "We are fighting a war of attrition in which the side that can sustain fire longest will prevail. Send more ammunition." The War Department complied. By 1944, the Pacific Theater was receiving ammunition shipments that rivaled the European theater in tonnage, even though the number of divisions deployed was smaller. The M1 had rewritten the logistics Bible. But logistics is only efficient when it is predictable, and war is anything but. Lieutenant Sorba learns this on October 14, 1944, when a radio call comes in from a forward supply officer near Tacloban. The voice on the other end is young, harried, shouting over the sound of mortar fire in the background. "Boxcar, this is Anvil 3. We are critically low on 30-06. Repeat, critically low. We have maybe 6 hours of combat consumption left and the line is hot. Can you push a resupply convoy through tonight?" Sorba checks her inventory sheets. She has the ammunition, she has the trucks. What she does not have is a secure route. The road between Finchhafen and Tacloban has been intermittently shelled for the past 2 days, and the MPs are recommending no night convoys until the engineers can sweep for mines. She makes a decision. "Anvil 3, you'll have your ammo by 0300. Confirm your position and mark it with red smoke. Boxcar out." She hangs up the handset and turns to her assistant, a corporal from Nebraska who has been running the forklift pool. "Get me 6 trucks, covered with drivers who don't spook easy. We're rolling in 2 hours. The convoy departs at midnight. 6 trucks, each loaded with 4,800 pounds of ammunition crates, escorted by a pair of jeeps with .50 caliber machine guns mounted on pedestals. Sorba rides in the lead jeep, not because she needs to, but because she has learned that convoys move faster when an officer is present to override the inevitable hesitations. The road is a scar of red clay that turns to porridge in the rain, and tonight it is raining. The trucks grind through the mud in low gear, headlights taped over except for narrow slits, the drivers hunched forward over their steering wheels. There is no conversation. The only sounds are the engines, the rain on the canvas, and the occasional crack of distant artillery. An hour into the drive, the convoy passes a burned-out supply truck, Japanese, its cargo scattered across the roadside. Rice bags, ammunition boxes, a tangle of telephone wire. No bodies. Someone has already cleared them. Sorba makes a note. Enemy supply lines are under pressure too. Good. The war is a mirror and both sides are looking at the same logistical abyss. They reach Tacloban at 3:20 hours, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The ammunition is unloaded in the dark, crate by crate, forklift operators working by feel and the glow of red-filtered flashlights. By dawn, Anvil 3's infantry companies have fresh bandoliers stacked in their foxholes, and the line holds through another day of fighting. Sorba catches 2 hours of sleep in the back of a truck, then radios back to Finchhafen. Resupply complete. Returning to depot. Boxcar out. She does not mention the close call on the return trip, the moment when her convoy rounded a bend and found the road blocked by a fallen tree, clearly cut and dragged into place, and the 30 seconds of terror while the .50 cal gunners scanned the tree line for an ambush that never came. Either the Japanese had moved on, or they had decided 6 trucks were not worth the fight. War is full of these small mercies, these moments when violence decides to take a coffee break. The M1 Garand's dominance was not purely mechanical. It was also cultural. The rifle had been designed in an era when American manufacturing was learning to do something extraordinary, mass-produce precision. John Garand's design was not the most elegant semi-automatic rifle on paper. European engineers had produced more refined actions, more sophisticated gas systems, but it was the most manufacturable. Every part was machined to tolerances that allowed for interchangeability. A trigger assembly from a rifle built in Springfield could be dropped into a rifle built by Winchester, and it would work. This was not trivial. It meant that field repairs were simple, that spare parts could be stockpiled without worrying about matching serial numbers, that an armorer with basic tools could keep a rifle running through months of hard use. The Japanese Type 99, by contrast, was hand-fitted at the factory. Parts were not interchangeable. A broken extractor or firing pin often meant the rifle was deadlined until a replacement could be fabricated, which in the chaos of the Pacific War often meant never. This difference in design philosophy cascaded through the respective war efforts. American units could maintain a higher percentage of operational rifles because repairs were faster and easier. Spare parts arrived in theater by the crate load, pre-sorted, ready to install. Japanese units, by contrast, saw their operational rifle counts dwindle as parts wore out and could not be replaced. By late 1944, it was not uncommon for Japanese infantry companies to have 30% of their rifles non-functional, kept in the inventory for bureaucratic reasons but useless in combat. The men carried them anyway, because the alternative was to admit the supply chain had failed, and that admission was culturally impossible. So they marched with broken rifles, hopping to scavenge from the dead, and when they met American units in combat, the firepower differential was not just 2-to-1 but effectively infinite, because a rifle that does not fire is a club, and clubs do not win firefights. There is a photograph, taken by a Signal Corps cameraman on Saipan in June 1944, that captures this asymmetry. The foreground shows an American rifleman, 19 or 20 years old, kneeling behind a fallen tree trunk, M1 Garand at his shoulder, cheek welded to the stock, finger on the trigger. His expression is blank, professional, the face of someone doing a job. The background, slightly out of focus, shows a Japanese position, a dugout with a machine gun emplacement, and 3 bodies sprawled in the dirt outside it. The caption, written by some anonymous Army press officer, reads, "Superior firepower overcomes fortified positions." It is bureaucratic prose drained of emotion, but it is also accurate. The rifleman in the photograph fired 64 rounds in that engagement, 8 clips, and expended them in less than 4 minutes. The Japanese machine gun crew, suppressed by the volume of fire, could not maintain effective counterfire and was eventually silenced by a grenade. The rifleman survived. He would survive the war. He would go home to Iowa, work in a hardware store, and never talk about this moment, but the photograph would live on, circulated in training manuals and staff colleges as an example of what semi-automatic fire could achieve. Lieutenant Sorba sees the photograph in a Stars and Stripes issue that arrives at Finchhafen in late October. She studies it for a long time, not because the image is shocking. By now she has seen enough casualty reports to be numb to the arithmetic of death, but because it makes her job suddenly, uncomfortably clear. Every crate she moves, every requisition she approves, every convoy she pushes through the mud is part of this loop. Ammunition to rifles to corpses to photographs to more requisitions. She is not pulling triggers, but she is enabling them, and the distinction feels thinner every day. That night, she writes to Ruth again. "There is a calculus here that I don't fully understand," she writes. "We measure everything in tons and rounds and man-hours, and at the end of the week someone tells us we're winning. But winning feels like a very large number divided by a slightly smaller number, and the remainder is boys who don't go home. I am good at my job. I wish I weren't." The rifle's psychological impact was as significant as its mechanical advantage. Japanese soldiers, interviewed after the war in POW camps and repatriation centers, consistently described American firepower as overwhelming, disorienting, impossible to counter. They used words like storm and avalanche, metaphors of natural disaster rather than human agency, as though the bullets were not coming from individual riflemen but from some impersonal force of nature. This was partially a function of volume. An American platoon could fire more rounds in a minute than a Japanese company, but it was also a function of consistency. The semi-automatic action of the M1 meant that fire could be sustained without the rhythmic pauses that characterized bolt-action combat. There was no interval in which to move, no beat in which to gather courage for a counterattack. The fire was continuous, and continuity is more demoralizing than intensity. A soldier can endure a burst of heavy fire if he knows it will end. But fire that never pauses, that follows him into cover and waits for him when he tries to move, breaks something deeper than fear. It breaks hope. This psychological erosion was compounded by the ping. That small, metallic sound, the en-bloc clip ejecting from the M1's receiver after the 8th round, became one of the most discussed acoustic signatures of the Pacific War. Japanese tactical manuals, updated throughout 1943 and 1944, instructed soldiers to listen for the ping, because it signified a 2-second window during which the American rifleman was reloading and momentarily vulnerable. In theory, this was sound advice. In practice, it was nearly useless. First, because the ping was often inaudible in the chaos of combat, drowned out by gunfire, explosions, and the ringing in everyone's ears. Second, because American infantry quickly learned to stagger their reloads, so that while one man was chambering a fresh clip, the others were still firing. And third, because even if a Japanese soldier did hear the ping and did try to exploit the reload window, he was still facing an American squad with multiple Garans, a Browning automatic rifle, and likely a .30 caliber machine gun, all of which were still shooting. The ping became less a tactical opportunity and more a kind of mocking punctuation, a sonic reminder that the Americans had ammunition to spare and the confidence to let you know when they were reloading. By mid-1944, the legend of the ping had grown to the point where some American riflemen began to exploit it psychologically. There are accounts, unverified but persistent in veteran oral histories, of riflemen deliberately throwing an empty clip into the dirt to produce the ping sound, hopping to lure Japanese soldiers out of cover. Whether this tactic worked is debatable. Whether it was attempted is almost certain. War breeds this kind of gamesmanship, these small deceptions that cost nothing and might, just might, tip the balance in a firefight. The M1 had become more than a weapon. It had become a presence, a set of expectations, a constellation of sounds and capabilities that lived in the enemy's head rent-free. But weapons, no matter how effective, do not win wars alone. They are tools, and tools require logistics, training, maintenance, and the vast unglamorous machinery of supply that keeps them in the fight. This is where Lieutenant Evelyn Seasorba's story intersects with the rifle's story, because the M1 Garand was only as good as the ammunition that fed it, and ammunition only reached the front lines because people like Seasorba had turned chaos into system. The depot at Finchhafen under her supervision had become a model of efficiency. Color-coded priority tags, red for units in contact, yellow for units in reserve, green for training and rear area security. Rotating stock, oldest ammunition issued first to prevent deterioration. Manifests cross-checked against shipping records to catch discrepancies before they became shortfalls. It was not glamorous work. It did not win medals. But it kept 14,000 riflemen supplied with the one thing that mattered more than courage or tactics, the ability to shoot back. Seasorba's system was tested in November 1944 during the push toward Ormoc. MacArthur, impatient with the pace of the Leyte campaign, ordered an amphibious assault on the west coast of the island to cut Japanese supply lines and force a collapse. The operation required moving an entire division's worth of supplies, including ammunition for 14,000 M1 Garands, across the island in less than a week. The roads were impassable. The airstrips were under intermittent artillery fire. The only viable route was by sea, a coastal run through waters patrolled by Japanese submarines and subject to air attack. Seasorba spent 3 days rerouting shipments, consolidating loads, and negotiating with Navy transport officers who did not want to risk their vessels in contested waters. She won the argument by presenting them with a single, irrefutable fact. If the ammunition did not arrive, the assault would fail and the failure would be theirs to explain. The Navy agreed. The convoy sailed on November 28, reached Ormoc on December 1, and unloaded under cover of darkness while destroyers fired harassment rounds at suspected Japanese positions inland. The ammunition reached the rifle companies by dawn. The assault succeeded. Ormoc fell on December 10. The after-action report for the Ormoc operation, filed by 6th Army Headquarters in late December, contains a single paragraph about logistics. It reads, in part, "Ammunition resupply was timely and sufficient for all phases of the operation. No shortfalls were reported. Credit is due to the staff of Finchhafen Depot for exceptional planning and execution under difficult conditions." The paragraph is signed by a major general whose name is now forgotten. It does not mention Lieutenant Sorba. It does not mention Boxcar, but the rifle companies knew. The word had gotten around, the way word always gets around in an army, that there was a whack officer in the rear who made sure the ammo arrived on time, who did not tolerate excuses, who ran her depot like a rail yard and her supply convoys like clockwork. The infantry, unsentimental and pragmatic, bestowed on her the highest honor they had. They trusted her. When a platoon sergeant radioed for resupply, he did not worry that it would arrive late or incomplete. He knew Boxcar was on the other end of the line, and Boxcar did not fail. The Japanese, meanwhile, were learning to adapt. Adaptation in war is often less about innovation and more about survival, about finding ways to mitigate the enemy's advantages when you cannot match them. Japanese infantry tactics in late 1944 began to emphasize concealment over confrontation, ambush over assault. Orders to company commanders: avoid open engagements, use camouflage. Fire only when you have overwhelming local superiority, then withdraw before American firepower can concentrate. The Type 99 Arisaka, slower firing but more accurate at range, was repositioned as a marksman's weapon rather than a standard infantry rifle. Snipers, already a core component of Japanese tactics, were issued the best rifles, the best optics, and instructions to target American officers and automatic weapons crews first. The goal was not to win firefights. By late 1944, that was understood to be impossible, but to delay, to inflict casualties disproportionate to the attacking force, to make every yard of advance cost American lives and American time. It was a doctrine of attrition born from desperation, and it worked, to an extent. American casualties in the Philippines were higher than expected. But the M1 Garand and the logistical system that sustained it meant that American infantry could afford to fight attrition battles. The Japanese could not. There is a concept in military theory called overmatch, the degree to which one side's capabilities exceed the others in a given domain. In the Pacific War, the United States achieved overmatch in industrial production, naval power, air superiority, and less discussed but equally important, small arms firepower. The M1 Garand was not just better than the Type 99 Arisaka, it was better in ways that compounded over time. Every firefight won more easily meant fewer casualties, which meant units stayed at strength longer, which meant they could sustain operations longer, which meant the strategic tempo favored the Americans. Every Japanese unit worn down by attrition was harder to replace because Japan's industrial base was shrinking under blockade and bombing, and its pool of trained infantry was finite. By contrast, American units could be rotated out, refitted, and returned to combat with fresh equipment and full ammunition loads. The M1 Garand was the rifle that made this possible. It was the hinge between industrial capacity and battlefield outcome, the mechanism that turned Detroit's assembly lines into firepower in the Philippines. But mechanisms break. The M1, for all its reliability, was not immune to the brutality of tropical warfare. Humidity-corroded metal, mud-jammed actions, salt-spray-pitted barrels, stocks cracked. Rifle companies in the field developed ad hoc maintenance rituals to keep their weapons running: daily cleaning, obsessive lubrication, hoarding of spare parts. Armorers, the unsung specialists who kept the rifles functional, became as valuable as medics. A good armorer could diagnose a malfunction by sound, replace a broken part in minutes, and keep a company's rifles at 90% operational status even after weeks in the jungle. A bad armorer meant rifles deadlined, men defenseless, and firefights lost. The Army, learning from experience, began to assign 2 armorers per company instead of 1, and to prioritize spare parts shipments alongside ammunition. The M1 was a machine, and machines require maintenance, and maintenance requires people who know what they are doing. The rifle's reputation for reliability was earned not just by John Garand's design, but by thousands of armorers who kept that design running in conditions Garand had never imagined. Lieutenant C. Sorba sees this in microcosm every day. The depot at Finchhafen is not just an ammunition hub. It is also a clearinghouse for damaged weapons, a way station where broken rifles arrive from the field, get triaged by armorers, and either return to service or get tagged for shipment back to a rear area rebuild facility. She walks through the armorer's tent one afternoon in mid-December and finds a dozen M1s laid out on tarp-covered tables, each with a tag describing its malfunction.